The rain was relentless, hammering against the windows of my small office as thunder growled in the distance. I sat there, hands gripping my mug of coffee, feeling the weight of 1,000 thoughts pressing on my mind. Deadlines, bills, the endless scroll of news feeds packed with chaos and despair. Felt like I was in the eye of a storm, and yet the storm wasn't outside. It was within me. My heart raced. My mind spiraled. I was caught in a whirlwind of anxiety, desperately grasping for a way out. And then, something extraordinary happened. I remembered a story I once heard about an old Buddhist monk who lived on a remote mountain. The monk was renowned for his ability to remain calm no matter what happened around him. People would travel from miles away just to witness his unshakable peace. One day, a group of skeptics decided to test him. They shouted at him, cursed him, and even threw insults about his family. Yet, the monk remained serene, a faint smile on his face. When they finally gave up, frustrated by his lack of reaction, one of them asked, "How can you stay so calm? Aren't you angry or hurt by what we said?" The monk's response was simple but profound. If someone gives you a gift and you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong? That story struck me like lightning on that stormy night. I realized that the chaos around me didn't have to define me. I didn't have to accept every thought or emotion that barged into my mind. Uninvited, like the monk, I could choose to let the storm rage on without letting it consume me. But how? How do you get there? How do you become that calm in the middle of life's storms? That night marked the beginning of my journey into exploring the principles of Buddhism, not as a religion, but as a way of life. And here's what I discovered. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you cultivate. It's not waiting for you at the end of a vacation or a quiet moment. It's already within you, hidden beneath layers of worry, stress, and distraction, like the sun obscured by clouds. The question isn't whether peace exists. It's whether you're willing to uncover it. I'd like to share a story about a friend of mine, Daniel. Daniel was the epitome of success, at least on the surface. He had the six-figure job, the luxury car, and the downtown loft that everyone envied. But beneath the polished exterior, Daniel was crumbling. He couldn't sleep at night. His relationships were strained, and his mind was constantly racing with thoughts of what if and what next. One weekend, Daniel called me, his voice trembling. "I feel like I'm losing it," he said. "Everything looks fine from the outside, but inside, I'm a mess. How do you handle it all?" I shared with him something I had learned, the practice of mindful breathing. It's not about stopping your thoughts or fixing your problems all at once. I told him, it's about creating space between you and the chaos. When you focus on your breath, you're anchoring yourself to the present moment, even if everything else is spiraling. Skeptical but desperate, Daniel gave it a shot. He started with just 5 minutes a day, sitting quietly and focusing on his breath. Inhale, exhale. Slowly but surely, he began to notice a shift. The noise in his mind didn't disappear entirely, but it no longer controlled him. Over time, Daniel began to rebuild his life, not from a place of striving, but from a place of peace. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds great, but I don't have time to sit and breathe when my life feels like it's on fire. Trust me, I get it. In today's fast-paced world, slowing down feels counterintuitive. But here's the thing. The storms in life will never stop. There will always be deadlines, distractions, and drama. Waiting for the world to calm down is like waiting for the ocean to stop having waves. It's not about controlling the waves. It's about learning how to surf. Imagine being on a surfboard for the first time. The waves look intimidating, crashing around you with no mercy. But then, with practice, you learn to ride them. You realize that the power of the ocean is something you can work with, not fight against. That's what cultivating inner peace feels like. It's not about avoiding life's challenges. It's about meeting them with grace and resilience. One of the most powerful metaphors I've encountered in Buddhism is the image of the sky and the clouds. Your mind is like the sky, vast, open, and unchanging. Thoughts and emotions, on the other hand, are like clouds. They come and go, sometimes light and fluffy, sometimes dark and stormy. But no matter how heavy the clouds, the sky remains untouched. This perspective changes everything. When you stop identifying with every thought and emotion that crosses your mind, you create a sense of spaciousness. You realize that just because it's raining today doesn't mean the sun isn't shining above the clouds. I once attended a retreat where the teacher shared a profound practice called pausing. It's as simple as it sounds. Whenever you feel overwhelmed, pause, take a deep breath, ask yourself, what's really happening right now? Most of the time, you'll find that the chaos is less about what's happening and more about your reaction to it. During the retreat, we practiced this with mundane activities, walking slowly, eating mindfully, even washing dishes with full attention. At first, felt strange. Who has time to wash dishes mindfully? But something magical happened. The more I slowed down, the more present I became, and in that presence, I found a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. As the storm outside my window finally began to subside, I realized something profound. The storm wasn't the problem. My resistance to it was. Life will always bring storms, both literal and metaphorical. But if you can learn to be still in the midst of them, you'll discover a kind of strength and peace that no storm can shake. And that's what we're here to talk about today. In this video, we're going to dive into practical tools and timeless Buddhist principles that can help you transform your mind into a sanctuary of peace. These aren't abstract ideas. They're practices you can start today, right now, no matter where you are or what you're going through. So, are you ready? Let's step into the storm, not to fight it, but to find the calm within. I used to believe that peace meant complete silence, no thoughts, no distractions, just a serene, still mind like a pristine lake untouched by the wind. For years, I chased that vision, thinking it was the ultimate goal. But no matter how hard I tried, my thoughts would come rushing back, like ripples breaking the surface of the water. Frustrated, I wondered, was peace just an illusion? That all changed one summer afternoon. I was sitting by a river, watching the current flow steadily over smooth rocks. Leaves floated along, carried effortlessly by the water. In that moment, something clicked. The river didn't stop moving, and yet, it was peaceful. Its motion wasn't chaotic. It was natural, inevitable. That's when I realized, peace isn't about stopping the flow. It's about learning to sit calmly on the bank, watching the river move without getting swept away. One of the most profound lessons in Buddhism is that thoughts are impermanent. They come and go, like clouds drifting across the sky. Some are light and airy, while others are dark and heavy. But no matter how stormy the clouds may seem, the sky remains untouched. It doesn't cling to the clouds or resist them. It simply lets them pass. This idea transformed how I approached my own mind. I used to see my thoughts as permanent fixtures, defining who I was. A bad day at work would spiral into thoughts of inadequacy. I'm not good enough. I'll never succeed. But once I started viewing my thoughts as passing clouds, I began to see them for what they truly were: temporary, fleeting, and ultimately powerless unless I gave them strength. Have you ever had a song stuck in your head, playing on an endless loop? That's what mental chatter feels like. It's a constant stream of thoughts, often repetitive and unhelpful, pulling your attention in a dozen directions at once. The more you try to fight it, the louder it seems to get. I once met a man named Robert who described this struggle perfectly. Robert was a high school teacher, and his days were filled with the demands of lesson plans, grading, and managing rowdy teenagers. At night, his mind would replay every moment, analyzing what he could have done better. It's like my brain never shuts off, he told me. Even when I'm lying in bed, I'm still in the classroom. When I shared the concept of impermanence with him, Robert was skeptical. How can I just let go of these thoughts? He asked. They feel so real. I told him about the practice of labeling thoughts, noticing them without judgment and giving them a simple name: worry, regret, self-doubt. By labeling his thoughts, Robert created a sense of distance from them. Over time, he learned to observe them without getting entangled in their web. Buddhism teaches that the self is not defined by thoughts, emotions, or external labels. This can be a difficult concept to grasp, especially in a world that constantly tells us who we are. Our jobs, relationships,
Achèvement.
and failures all contribute to the story we tell ourselves. But what happens when we strip all that away? Who are we at our core? I struggled with this question for years. Growing up, I was a perfectionist, tying my self-worth to my accomplishments. If I succeeded, I felt worthy. If I failed, I felt worthless. It was an exhausting cycle, and no matter how much I achieved, it was never enough. I was chasing an identity built on external validation, not realizing that my true self had nothing to do with those labels. One day, during a meditation retreat, a teacher shared a powerful analogy. He said, "Imagine you're holding a glass of muddy water. If you keep stirring it, the water stays cloudy. But if you set the glass down and let it be, the mud settles, and the water becomes clear." Your mind is the same way. Stop stirring, and you'll see your true nature. That image stayed with me. I realized that I didn't need to find myself. I simply needed to let the mud settle. Stillness doesn't mean the absence of motion. It means finding steadiness within the motion. Think of a tree in a storm. The branches may sway wildly, but the trunk remains rooted. Similarly, peace isn't about eliminating noise but learning to remain grounded amidst it. I experienced this firsthand during a particularly chaotic period of my life. My job was demanding, my relationships were strained, and my health was suffering. Every day felt like a battle just to stay afloat. But instead of trying to fix everything at once, I decided to focus on one simple practice: sitting quietly for 5 minutes each morning, breathing deeply, and observing my thoughts. First, those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. My mind resisted the stillness, bombarding me with reminders of everything I needed to do. But as I continued the practice, something shifted. I began to notice the gaps between my thoughts, the spaces of quiet where peace resided. Those gaps grew wider over time, and I started carrying that sense of calm with me throughout the day. Let me tell you about Clara, a single mother who worked tirelessly to provide for her 2 children. Clara's days were a blur of responsibilities, and she often felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all. "I feel like I'm drowning," she confessed. "There's no room for peace in my life." When Clara learned about the impermanence of thoughts, she was hesitant. "That sounds nice in theory," she said, "but my problems are real." Still, she decided to try a simple exercise. Every night before bed, she would write down the thoughts that were troubling her. Then, she would close her journal and say to herself, "These are just clouds. They will pass." First, it felt unnatural, but over time, Clara noticed a change. By externalizing her thoughts and acknowledging their impermanence, she felt less burdened by them. She began to approach her challenges with a newfound clarity and strength. "The problems didn't go away," she told me, "but I stopped letting them define me." If you're ready to begin your own journey to inner peace, here are a few practices to help you reconnect with your true self. Pause and reflect. Take a few minutes each day to sit quietly and observe your thoughts. Notice their impermanence and remind yourself that they are not who you are. Label your thoughts. When a thought arises, give it a simple label: fear, anger, joy,
Anticipation.
This helps create distance and reduces the tendency to over-identify with your thoughts. Practice self-compassion. Treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer a friend. Remember that you are not defined by your mistakes or successes. Embrace imperfection. Let go of the need to control every aspect of your life. Trust that the mud will settle and clarity will come. Understanding the self is not about reaching a destination. It's about embracing the journey. Each moment of stillness, each breath of awareness, brings you closer to the peace that has always been within you. And as you sit calmly on the bank of your own river, watching the flow of thoughts and emotions, you'll discover that the true self, the unshakable core of who you are, has been there all along, waiting for you to notice. After the storm outside my window that night, I began to explore what it truly meant to cultivate calmness from within. The realization that peace wasn't something to be found, but something to be nurtured internally was both empowering and daunting. How do you build something that seems so intangible, especially when the world feels like it's constantly conspiring against you? Let me share a story about Lisa, a single mom of two who worked 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Lisa's life was chaos: early mornings, late nights, and a constant juggle of responsibilities. She would often tell me how she dreamed of escaping to a quiet cabin in the woods, away from the demands of her everyday life. "If only I could get away," she said, "I'd finally feel calm." But life didn't grant Lisa a cabin retreat. Instead, she discovered something even more profound. One day, after a particularly exhausting week, Lisa came across a book about mindfulness. It talked about finding peace in the present moment. No matter where you were, skeptical but curious, she decided to try it. During her lunch break, instead of scrolling through her phone, she sat quietly, closed her eyes, and focused on her breathing. Inhale, exhale. First, her mind raced with thoughts: what she had to do next, what bills were due, whether she'd remembered to pack her son's lunch. But gradually, she noticed the spaces between those thoughts. In those spaces, she felt a flicker of peace. Lisa's life didn't suddenly become easier, but her perspective shifted. She began to integrate small moments of mindfulness into her day, pausing during her morning coffee, breathing deeply while waiting at a red light. Over time, she realized that calmness wasn't something she needed to escape to. It was something she could carry with her. One of the most transformative lessons I've learned on this journey is that thoughts are not who we are. This realization is deceptively simple but profoundly liberating. We've all had moments where our thoughts spiral out of control, worrying about the future, replaying past mistakes, or crafting worst-case scenarios that never happen. It's easy to feel like these thoughts define us, but they don't. A teacher once explained it to me this way: imagine you're sitting by a river, watching the water flow by. The river is your mind, and the leaves floating on the surface are your thoughts. Some leaves are small and insignificant. Others are larger and more distracting. But no matter how many leaves pass, you are not the river, you are the observer. You can choose to watch the leaves without grabbing onto them. This brings me to one of my favorite metaphors: the sky and the clouds. Your mind is like the sky, vast, unchanging, and constant. Your thoughts are like the clouds that drift across it. Sometimes they're light and fluffy, other times dark and stormy. But no matter how dense the clouds, the sky remains unchanged. It's always there, steady and blue, even when you can't see it. I once shared this metaphor with a friend, Ethan, who was struggling with anxiety. He'd always felt overwhelmed by his thoughts, as if they controlled him. When I explained that he could observe his thoughts like clouds passing through the sky, it was like a light bulb went off for him. "You mean I don't have to fight them?" he asked. "I can just let them be?" Exactly. Ethan started a simple practice. Whenever a negative thought came to mind, he'd take a deep breath and silently say, "This is just a cloud. It will pass." At first, felt silly, but over time, it became second nature. He began to see his thoughts for what they were: temporary visitors, not permanent residents. Learning to detach from your thoughts doesn't mean ignoring them. It means acknowledging them without letting them define you. Imagine you're hosting a party. Guests arrive, some pleasant and some unpleasant. You greet them all politely, but don't let the unpleasant ones overstay their welcome. Your thoughts are like those guests. You can acknowledge their presence without letting them take over. This concept was life-changing for Sarah, a woman I met at a meditation workshop. Sarah was haunted by self-critical thoughts. "I'm not good enough," they would whisper. "I'll never succeed." She spent years trying to silence those voices, but the more she fought them, the louder they seemed to become. During the workshop, She learned a technique called labeling. Instead of trying to suppress her thoughts, she began labeling them. Ah, there's self-doubt again. Or, oh, that's fear talking. By naming her thoughts, she created a sense of distance from them. Over time, those voices lost their power. Practical steps to cultivate inner peace. Start small with breathing. Begin with just 2 minutes a day of mindful breathing. Inhale deeply through your nose, hold for a moment, and exhale slowly through your mouth. As thoughts arise, gently guide your focus back to your breath. Practice mindful observation. Spend a few minutes each day observing your thoughts without judgment. Imagine them as clouds or leaves floating by. Notice their shape and movement, but resist the urge to engage with them. Slow down. Incorporate mindfulness into everyday activities. Walk slowly, savor your meals, or take a moment to feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. These small pauses can anchor you in the present. Use affirmations. Create affirmations that remind you of your inner peace. For example, I am the calm in the storm. Or this thought is temporary. I am steady. Let me tell you about Tom, a firefighter who faced unimaginable stress every day. Tom's job required him to stay calm in life or death situations. But off the job, he struggled with overwhelming anxiety. One day, his therapist introduced him to the practice of observing his thoughts. Tom was skeptical. How could such a simple practice help with something as intense as his anxiety? But he gave it a try. During his moments of stress, he would pause and visualize his thoughts as fireflies in a jar. Some were bright and insistent, others dim and fleeting. Instead of trying to swat them away, he simply watched them. Over time, this practice became a lifeline. Tom found that even in the heat of a crisis, he could ground himself by observing his inner world without being consumed by it. What I found most inspiring about this journey is how inner peace doesn't just transform your life. It impacts everyone around you. When you carry calmness within, you become a source of steadiness for others. It's like being the anchor in a storm-tossed sea. Your stability helps others find their footing. Take Mia, for example, a school teacher known for her incredible patience. Her students were often rowdy and distracted, but Mia never raised her voice. When asked how she stayed so calm, she shared her secret. I practice mindfulness before every class. I remind myself that my peace doesn't depend on their behavior. It's something I carry within me. Her calmness created a ripple effect, transforming not just her classroom but the lives of her students. As I sit here writing this, I'm reminded of the storm outside my window that night. The rain has long since stopped, but its lessons remain. Inner peace isn't about waiting for the storms of life to end. It's about finding the stillness within you that no storm can touch. Each breath you take, each thought you observe without judgment, is a step toward that peace. And the best part? It's already within you, waiting to be uncovered. Let me take you back to a rainy evening in New York City, where cars honked impatiently, the traffic lights blinked in chaotic rhythm, and pedestrians hurried across slick streets. Amidst this urban symphony of chaos, Mark, a high-powered businessman, sat in his office, staring at a spreadsheet that seemed to stretch on forever. Deadlines loomed, his phone buzzed incessantly, and his heart raced as if trying to keep up with the tempo of the city outside. Mark was no stranger to stress. As the CEO of a growing tech firm, his days were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and expectations. But lately, the pressure felt unbearable. Thoughts of failure, missed opportunities, and self-doubt plagued him, flitting through his mind like an uncontrollable storm. Sleep eluded him, and even his favorite pastimes, jogging in the park or playing the piano, offered little relief. He was stuck in a mental traffic jam, unable to move forward or find a way out. One day, after yet another sleepless night, Mark confided in a friend who suggested he try something unconventional, a practice called non-judgmental awareness. Intrigued but skeptical, Mark decided to give it a shot. The instructions were simple. Close your eyes. Imagine your thoughts as vehicles on a highway, and watch them pass by. Don't chase them. Don't judge them. Just observe. The first time he tried, Mark felt ridiculous. He sat on his couch, closed his eyes, and pictured a busy road. But instead of calming down, his thoughts seemed louder than ever, racing cars of worry, slow buses of guilt, and noisy motorbikes of frustration zipped through his mind. He felt like a traffic cop overwhelmed by the sheer volume of vehicles. But then, something shifted. As Mark persisted, he realized he didn't have to control the traffic. He could simply sit by the roadside, watching the vehicles pass. Some cars were shiny and new, others were battered and old, but none of them stayed on the road forever. They came, and they went. The power of non-judgmental awareness lies in letting go of the need to control your thoughts. Too often, we try to stop negative thoughts or force positive ones, only to exhaust ourselves in the process. Mark experienced this firsthand. He used to spend hours dissecting every worry, trying to solve problems that didn't yet exist. But as he embraced the practice of observing his thoughts without judgment, he noticed a profound change. One afternoon, during a particularly stressful meeting, Mark felt a surge of panic as the team discussed a potential setback. Instead of spiraling into worst-case scenarios, he paused and took a deep breath. In his mind, he pictured the panic as a noisy motorcycle revving its engine. He didn't try to chase it away, he simply watched it zoom by. The meeting continued, and while the setback was real, Mark approached it with a newfound clarity and calmness. Mark's transformation wasn't immediate, but it was steady. Over time, he began to see his thoughts not as enemies to be defeated, but as fleeting visitors. He likened his mind to the vast sky and his thoughts to passing clouds. This shift in perspective allowed him to regain control, not by suppressing his thoughts, but by refusing to let them control him. One day, as Mark walked through Central Park, he reflected on how far he'd come. The park was bustling with activity: joggers, dog walkers, children playing, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, Mark felt a quiet sense of peace. He realized that life, much like the traffic in his mind, was constantly in motion. The key wasn't to stop the motion, but to find stillness amidst it. Mark's story illustrates the transformative power of non-judgmental awareness. It's a practice that anyone can adopt, regardless of their circumstances. You don't need a quiet retreat or hours of meditation. All you need is a willingness to pause and observe. Here are some practical steps to get started. Find a quiet moment. Set aside a few minutes each day to sit quietly. Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Imagine your thoughts as vehicles on a highway. Observe without judgment. As thoughts arise, label them if you like. There's worry. That's doubt. Here comes excitement. But don't engage with them. Let them come and go. Return to the present. If you find yourself chasing a thought, gently bring your focus back to the present moment. This might mean paying attention to your breath, the sensation of your feet on the ground, or the sounds around you. Be consistent. Non-judgmental awareness improves with practice. Start small and build gradually. What's remarkable about this practice is how it affects not only your inner world, but also your interactions with others. Mark's newfound calmness began to influence his team. His ability to stay composed under pressure inspired his employees to approach challenges with the same level-headedness. Meetings became more productive, and the overall atmosphere in the office shifted. One of Mark's colleagues, Sarah, noticed the change. "You seem so different lately," she said one day. "What's your secret?" Mark smiled and shared his story about the mental traffic jam and how he'd learned to sit by the roadside instead of trying to direct every vehicle. Sarah was intrigued and decided to try the practice herself. Months later, Sarah shared her own breakthrough. As a working mom juggling deadlines and a toddler's tantrums, she often felt pulled in 1,000 directions. But one evening, after a particularly challenging day, she sat down and imagined her thoughts as cars on a busy highway. To her surprise, the simple act of observing them without judgment brought a sense of relief. Over time, she found herself less reactive and more present with her family. The power of this practice lies in its simplicity. It teaches us to step back from our thoughts and emotions, creating a sense of space between the observer and the observed. This space allows us to respond to life with clarity and intention rather than reacting impulsively. A wise teacher once said, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." Non-judgmental awareness is like learning to surf the waves of your mind. It doesn't eliminate challenges, but it equips you to face them with grace and resilience. At its core, non-judgmental awareness is about living in the present moment. It's about accepting life as it is, without clinging to what you want or resisting what you don't. When we stop fighting the current, we discover that even in the midst of chaos, there is a quiet river of peace flowing within us. Mark often reflected on how his journey began with a single act of sitting down and observing his thoughts. What started as a simple exercise became a cornerstone of his life, a reminder that no matter how hectic the world outside, the road to inner peace was always within his reach. And so, the traffic of life continues. Cars rush by, honking and roaring, but somewhere on the side of the road, Mark sits, calm and steady, watching it all with a peaceful smile. Detachment. For many, the word conjures images of cold indifference or emotional disengagement. But true detachment, as taught in Buddhism, is not about closing your heart. It's about opening it wide enough to let go of what weighs it down. It's the freedom to experience life fully without clinging to fleeting emotions, possessions, or fears. And when you master detachment, you create the space for peace to flourish. Let me share a story. One of my favorite Buddhist parables. Two monks were traveling together, walking in silence along a dusty road. As they approached a river, they saw a woman standing by the edge, unable to cross. She asked for help. Without hesitation, the older monk lifted her onto his back, carried her across the river, and set her down on the opposite bank. The two monks then continued their journey. Hours passed, and the younger monk grew increasingly agitated. Finally, he couldn't contain himself and blurted out, "How could you carry that woman across the river? You know we're not supposed to touch women." The older monk smiled gently and said, "I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This story has stayed with me for years because it's such a simple yet powerful reminder. We often carry burdens far longer than we need to. Resentment, anger, regret. These emotions cling to us like heavy stones, and we carry them even when there's no reason to. Detachment is about setting those stones down. One common misconception about detachment is that it means not caring. But detachment is not about shutting yourself off from the world. It's about engaging with it more fully, without being shackled by unhealthy attachments. Take Emma, a woman I met at a mindfulness retreat. Emma had spent years in a high-powered corporate job, climbing the ladder of success. She had the salary, the house, the car, everything she thought she needed to be happy. But deep down, she felt empty. "I'm trapped," she told me. "I'm so afraid of losing what I've built that I can't enjoy any of it." During the retreat, Emma practiced letting go, not of her possessions, but of her fear of losing them. She began to see her job and achievements as parts of her life, not definitions of her worth. "I used to think detachment meant giving everything up," she said later. "But now I see it's about changing how I relate to things. I can appreciate them without being consumed by them." Resentment and anger are some of the heaviest burdens we carry. They tether us to the past, keeping old wounds open and fresh. I once heard a teacher compare resentment to holding a hot coal, intending to throw it at someone else. The only person who gets burned is you. A close friend of mine, Ben, learned this the hard way. After a bitter divorce, he was consumed by anger toward his ex-wife. Every conversation, every memory, was tinged with resentment. "I'm not hurting her," he admitted one night. "I'm just hurting myself." Through therapy and mindfulness, Ben began to practice detachment. He didn't deny his feelings or pretend they didn't exist. Instead, he acknowledged them, then chose not to hold on to them. "It's like releasing a balloon," he explained. You have to open your hand and let it go. It's scary at first, but then you feel lighter. Material possessions often give us a false sense of security. We think, if I have more money, a bigger house, a nicer car, then I'll be happy. But this endless pursuit can cloud our judgment and keep us from seeing what truly matters. I once met a man named Richard, who had spent decades chasing wealth. He was a self-made millionaire but confessed that he felt no peace. I thought having everything would make me feel safe, he said. But the more I have, the more I worry about losing it. Richard's turning point came during a volunteer trip to a rural village. There, he met families who lived with far less than he ever imagined possible, yet radiated joy and contentment. They weren't attached to things, he said. They were attached to each other, to their community, to their faith. Inspired, Richard began practicing detachment by simplifying his life. He downsized his home, focused on experiences rather than possessions, and reconnected with his loved ones. I didn't lose anything, he said with a smile. I gained everything. Perhaps the hardest attachment to let go of is the illusion of control. We want to believe we can manage every aspect of our lives, avoid pain, and ensure success. But life is unpredictable, and clinging to control only leads to anxiety and frustration. I learned this lesson from a nurse named Carla, who worked in a busy hospital emergency room. Every day, I'm reminded how little control we have, she said. People come in with their whole lives ahead of them, and everything changes in an instant. Carla used to struggle with this lack of control. She would second-guess every decision, replay every mistake in her mind. But over time, she began practicing what she called faithful detachment. She did her best in every situation, then released the outcome. I can't control what happens, she explained, but I can control how I respond, and that makes all the difference. If you're ready to embrace detachment, here are some practical steps to help you get started. Acknowledge your attachments. Reflect on what you're holding on to, whether it's resentment, material desires, or the need for control. Simply acknowledging these attachments is the first step toward letting them go. Practice gratitude. Detachment doesn't mean rejecting what you have. It means appreciating it without clinging to it. Each day, take a moment to be grateful for what you have, knowing that nothing is permanent. Use visualization. Imagine your attachments as balloons. One by one, picture yourself releasing them into the sky. Watch them float away, leaving you lighter and freer. Meditate on impermanence. Spend time meditating on the impermanence of life. Remind yourself that everything, good and bad, is temporary. This awareness can help you let go of unhealthy attachments. Embrace uncertainty. Instead of fearing the unknown, see it as an opportunity for growth. Trust that life's unpredictability can lead to unexpected blessings. When we let go of unhealthy attachments, we create space for peace, joy, and connection. We free ourselves from the weight of what no longer serves us and open our hearts to what truly matters. Detachment isn't about losing. It's about gaining the freedom to live fully. As I reflect on the story of the monk and the woman, I'm reminded of the simple yet profound truth it teaches. We don't have to carry our burdens forever. Whether it's anger, fear, or material attachments, we have the power to set them down. And when we do, we discover that peace isn't something we find. It's something we create by letting go. When I think about the journey toward inner peace, I'm reminded of a time in my life when everything felt like it was spinning out of control. Nights stretched endlessly as I lay awake, my mind racing with worries. What if I failed at work? What if my relationships fell apart? My thoughts would spiral, creating mountains out of molehills, leaving me exhausted before the day even began. One night, after hours of tossing and turning, I stumbled upon a simple phrase in a book: "You are not your thoughts." It was such a foreign idea to me at the time. I had always believed my thoughts were the essence of who I was, that the chaos in my mind defined me. But that phrase stuck with me, whispering a possibility I hadn't considered. What if peace wasn't about silencing the storm but learning to stand calmly in its center? I began incorporating small mindful practices into my evenings. Instead of scrolling through my phone before bed, I would sit quietly, focusing on my breath. First, my mind resisted. The thoughts came rushing in, demanding attention like children vying for a parent's approval. But instead of fighting them, I simply observed. I noticed how some thoughts were loud and urgent, while others were faint and fleeting. Over time, I realized that they all had one thing in common. They passed. One night, something remarkable happened. As I sat in the stillness, I felt a shift. The thoughts were still there, but they no longer gripped me. It was as if I had stepped back and was watching them from a distance. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. It wasn't because my worries had vanished, but because I had stopped carrying them so tightly. Anger was another area where I struggled. I used to be quick to snap, especially in moments of stress. A misplaced comment from a coworker, a family disagreement, even minor inconveniences would set me off. My reactions often led to unnecessary conflicts, leaving me and those around me hurt. One day, I had a particularly frustrating encounter with a colleague. As I felt the anger rising, I remembered something a teacher once told me. Between stimulus and response, there is a pause. In that pause lies your power to choose. I took a deep breath. In that moment of pause, I asked myself, what will this anger achieve? The answer was clear: nothing good. Instead of lashing out, I calmly addressed the issue. To my surprise, the conversation didn't escalate. It resolved peacefully, leaving me feeling empowered rather than drained. That single pause became a practice. Each time frustration bubbled up, I would stop, breathe, and ask myself, what am I about to create with this reaction? Over time, this practice transformed my relationships. The tension that once lingered after arguments dissolved, replaced by understanding and harmony. If there's one thing Buddhism has taught me, it's that transformation isn't a grand, sudden event. It's a quiet, steady process, like water dripping into a pot until it overflows. Small, consistent actions, done with intention, have the power to create profound change. I remember meeting an elderly woman named Margaret at a meditation retreat. Margaret had spent decades caring for others, often at the expense of her own well-being. By the time she retired, she felt depleted, unsure of who she was outside of her roles as a wife, mother, and caregiver. I want to find peace, she told me, but I don't know where to start. Our teacher suggested something simple. Spend 5 minutes each morning focusing on her breath. First, Margaret dismissed it as too small to make a difference, but she tried it anyway. Day after day, she sat in her favorite chair, closed her eyes, and breathed. Months later, Margaret shared her transformation. Those 5 minutes became 10, then 20, she said. And it's not just the time that's changed, it's me. I've learned to carry that peace with me throughout the day. Margaret's story is a testament to the power of starting small. Each breath, each moment of stillness, added up to a life that felt fuller and freer. Incorporating mindful practices doesn't require a dramatic overhaul of your daily routine. In fact, the beauty of these practices lies in their simplicity. Here are a few small actions that have made a big difference in my own life. Morning gratitude. Before getting out of bed, I take a moment to reflect on 3 things I'm grateful for. It's a simple practice, but it sets a positive tone for the day. Mindful walking. During my lunch breaks, I take a short walk and focus on the sensation of my feet touching the ground. This practice grounds me, pulling me out of my head and into the present moment. Mindful communication. Before responding in conversations, especially heated ones, I pause and take a breath. This simple act helps me respond with clarity and compassion rather than reacting impulsively. Evening reflection. At the end of the day, I spend a few minutes journaling. I write about what went well, what I learned, and what I'd like to let go of. This practice helps me release the day's events and sleep peacefully. Let me share a story about Sam, a young entrepreneur I met at a workshop. Sam was ambitious, driven, and constantly on the go, but his relentless pace left him feeling burned out and disconnected. "I want to be successful," he told me, "but I don't want to lose myself in the process." Our teacher suggested a practice that seemed counterintuitive to Sam. Slow down. Success isn't just about doing more. The teacher explained, it's about doing what matters with presence and intention. Sam started small. He set aside 5 minutes each morning to sit quietly and breathe. At first, felt unproductive, even wasteful, but over time, he noticed a change. Those 5 minutes helped him approach his work with greater clarity and focus. He began prioritizing tasks, saying no to unnecessary demands, and finding joy in the process rather than just the outcome. Years later, I ran into Sam at a conference. He was still successful, but there was a lightness about him that hadn't been there before. "I used to think peace and success were opposites," he said. "Now I see they're partners. You can't have one without the other." What I've learned on this journey is that building peace within doesn't just transform your own life. It ripples outward, touching everyone around you. When you carry peace, you inspire others to do the same. I once worked with a team where tensions ran high, deadlines were tight, and stress levels were through the roof. Inspired by my own practices, I introduced the idea of starting our meetings with a minute of silence. At first, my colleagues were skeptical, even amused, but as we continued, something shifted. That single minute helped us enter meetings with calmness and focus. Over time, the team's dynamic changed. We communicated more effectively, resolved conflicts more easily, and even found joy in our work. The path to peace is not a straight line. It's a journey with twists and turns, moments of clarity, and moments of doubt. But every step, no matter how small, brings you closer to the stillness that resides within you. As I reflect on my own journey, from sleepless nights to restful ones, from reactive anger to mindful pauses, I'm reminded of a simple truth. Peace is built one moment at a time, and with each moment, the chaos fades, replaced by clarity, presence, and a profound sense of wholeness. The bamboo farmer, a lesson in patience. Let me tell you about a bamboo farmer in a small village. Every day, he would rise with the sun, carry his bucket to the well, and water the patch of soil where he had planted bamboo seeds. The villagers watched with curiosity, then with pity, and finally with mockery. "Why waste your time?" they said. "Nothing is growing." The farmer heard their words but remained steadfast. Days turned into months, and months into years. For 5 long years, not a single shoot broke through the surface, but the farmer kept watering, trusting the unseen work happening beneath the soil. Then, in the 5th year, something remarkable happened. Almost overnight, the bamboo began to grow, first inches, then feet, then towering high into the sky. The villagers were astonished. "How did this happen so suddenly?" they asked. The farmer smiled. "It didn't happen suddenly," he said. "For 5 years, the bamboo was growing roots deep into the ground. Without those roots, could not have grown tall." This story reminds me of the journey of mindfulness and personal growth. Often, we don't see immediate results. It's tempting to give up, to believe our efforts are in vain. But beneath the surface, changes are taking place. Every small act of mindfulness, every moment of stillness, every breath of awareness is like watering the soil. One day, seemingly all at once, we see the growth, the calm in the storm, faith and mindfulness in crisis. Years ago, a cargo ship found itself in the middle of a violent storm. The waves towered over the vessel, tossing it like a toy in a bathtub. Panic swept through the crew and passengers. People screamed, prayed, and clung to anything that might keep them afloat. Among the chaos was a Buddhist monk. He sat quietly on the deck, his robes soaked with rain, chanting softly. Passenger, trembling with fear, approached him. "How can you be so calm?" she asked. We're going to die. The monk opened his eyes and smiled gently. Whether we survive or not is beyond my control, he said. But I can choose how I face this moment. Panic will not save me, but calmness may guide me to safety. As the storm raged on, his serenity became a beacon for others. Gradually, the passengers stopped screaming and started helping one another. Together, they managed to keep the ship afloat until the storm passed. The monk's faith and mindfulness didn't just save his life. They inspired hope and courage in those around him. This story is a powerful reminder that while we cannot control life's storms, we can control how we navigate them. Calmness isn't just a personal refuge. It's a ripple that can steady the waters for others. Lessons and practical takeaways. 1. Pause before reacting. One of the most transformative lessons I've learned is the power of a pause. In moments of anger or fear, our first instinct is often to react impulsively. We say things we don't mean, make decisions we later regret, or let emotions control us. But a single pause, a moment of reflection, can change everything. Let me share a personal story. Years ago, I had an argument with a close friend. Tensions were high, and words flew like arrows, sharp and cutting. As my friend walked away, I felt anger bubbling up, ready to boil over. I wanted to call him and say something hurtful, something I knew I'd regret. Instead, I paused. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and asked myself, what will this reaction achieve? The answer was clear: nothing good. I waited until I had calmed down before reaching out. When we finally talked, the conversation was productive, not destructive. That pause didn't just save our friendship. It taught me the value of restraint. Now, whenever I feel anger rising, I remind myself, pause, breathe, choose. It's a practice that has brought peace to my relationships and clarity to my decisions. 2. Be the observer. Imagine sitting by a river, watching the water flow, leaves drift by on the current. Some large and attention-grabbing, others small and barely noticeable. You don't jump in to chase them or try to stop the flow. You simply watch. This is the practice of being the observer. Our thoughts and emotions are like those leaves. They come and go, carried by the current of our mind. When we identify with them, when we think, I am my anger or I am my sadness, we lose ourselves in the flow. But when we step back and observe, we create space between ourselves and our experiences. A friend of mine, Lisa, struggled with anxiety. Her thoughts would spiral, each one feeding the next, until she felt trapped in a whirlwind. I shared with her the practice of observing her thoughts without judgment. Imagine your thoughts as clouds, I told her. Watch them drift by. They're not you. They're just passing through. At first, Lisa found it difficult, but with time and practice, she noticed a shift. I still have anxious thoughts, she said, but they don't control me anymore. I can watch them come and go, and that makes all the difference. 3. Cultivate gratitude. Gratitude is one of the simplest yet most profound practices for fostering peace. It's easy to focus on what's wrong in our lives, on the challenges, the setbacks, the things we lack. But when we shift our attention to what we have, we open our hearts to joy. Every morning, I start my day by naming 3 things I'm grateful for. Some days, they're big things: health, family, a meaningful job. Other days, they're small: a hot cup of coffee, kind word from a stranger, the warmth of the sun on my skin. This practice doesn't erase challenges, but it changes how I approach them. Gratitude is like a light that softens the shadows of our struggles. I once met a man named John who had lost his job and was struggling to stay positive. I suggested he try a gratitude journal, writing down 3 things he was thankful for each day. At first, he resisted. What do I have to be grateful for? He said, but he gave it a try. Weeks later, John told me the practice had changed his perspective. I still have challenges, he said, but now I see the good alongside the bad. That makes all the difference. 4. Practice daily. Mindfulness isn't a one-time fix. It's a daily practice. like brushing your teeth or exercising. Even 5 minutes a day can create a ripple effect in your life. I'll never forget a woman named Clara, who attended a mindfulness workshop I led. Clara was a busy mother of 3, juggling work, family, and endless to-do lists. She came to the workshop feeling overwhelmed and skeptical. "I don't have time for this," she said. "My days are too full." I encouraged her to start small, just 5 minutes of mindful breathing each morning. She agreed. Reluctantly, weeks later, Clara returned to the workshop with a smile on her face. "Those 5 minutes have become my sanctuary," she said. "They set the tone for my whole day. I'm more patient with my kids, more focused at work, and more present in my life." Clara's story is a reminder that mindfulness doesn't require hours of meditation or dramatic life changes. It starts with small, consistent actions. A single breath, a single moment of stillness can plant the seeds of peace. As I reflect on these stories and lessons, I'm struck by the ripple effect of peace. When we practice mindfulness, it doesn't just transform our inner world, it touches everyone around us. The calm of the bamboo farmer inspires others to keep going. The serenity of the monk steadies those in the storm. The gratitude and patience we cultivate create harmony in our relationships and communities. Peace isn't a destination. It's a way of being, a journey we embark on each day, one small step at a time. And with each step, we grow stronger, steadier, and more rooted, like the bamboo that reaches for the sky. Peace and calmness are not distant destinations waiting to be reached. They are lifelong journeys we take, one mindful step at a time. Along this path, you'll discover that the storms of life, no matter how fierce, cannot shake the stillness that resides within you. This stillness is your anchor, your refuge, and your greatest strength. We at the Tranquil Mind are honored to be part of your journey. Let's continue to walk this path together, sharing our stories, challenges, and triumphs. We'd love to hear from you. What moments of calm have you found? How have these teachings shaped your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's grow together as a community rooted in mindfulness and peace. As you move forward, may you carry these teachings with you, turning every moment into an opportunity to nurture your inner sanctuary. Thank you for being part of our Tranquil Mind family. Until next time, take care, stay calm, and may peace be with you always.